Okay then, so in previous lessons we've been looking at what a major chord is and what a minor chord is and how they work. And we've also looked at the circle of fifths method of writing chord sequences to understand how we can use it to put a few chords together to generate the beginnings of a song. It's important to stress right now that the circle of fifths method that we've been using at the moment is a way of writing songs. It's not the way of writing songs. We'll be looking at all sorts of different techniques and ideas for writing a song. At the moment we're starting with chords and then we're adding bass and melody. Later on we'll probably start with melody and then add chords to it, or maybe start with a bass line and then add something to that. There are lots of different ways we could approach it. The reason we've started with the circle of fifths method is it's just a nice, simple, easy way to get things started. So in this lesson, what we're going to be doing is taking what we've already learned about generating chord sequences and then inputting them into a digital audio workstation. Now, there are lots and lots of different DAWs out there. The one I'm using mostly is called Logic. It's one that's used on Apple Mac devices. It's probably something you may have used before at school or college, but we'll be looking at all the different types of DAWs there are out there, how we can use them, and how we can take those chord sequences that we generated and put them into a digital audio workstation as a way of recording them. We're also going to look at the criteria that are needed for GCSE, what's expected of you in regards of having a written score or having something effectively on paper, as it were, that describes the piece of music that you're doing. When you submit your work, it's not just an audio file. It also has to be something that describes what the music is. Usually that would be in the form of a written score, but not necessarily. So let's first have a look at adding some chords into a DAW. So here we have my digital audio workstation. I've set it up with a piano on one channel and some strings on another. Now the simplest way to put your chords in is just to click the instrument that you want. Make sure the metronome is switched on always. That's going to save you a lot of hassle later on down the line. Click record and then play those chords in. The chords I chose were C major and G major. Just two chords, that's all we need for this exercise. So hit record and off we go. Now I could embellish those chords and do them as broken chords. However you like. And then the next thing I'm going to do the exact same chords on strings, I think. It really is as simple as that. And the way I've done this is I've got a keyboard, an electronic piano plugged into my computer, and I've told it to use that as my input method to record things, to put MIDI signals into my DAW. I can add strings to that if I want to. Very simple. Okay, that's probably the method you're most likely to use to put your ideas down not on paper, but on computer. Now then, that's not the only way. There are lots of other ways we could have done that. Let's explore what those are. If, for whatever reason, you don't have a setup where you've got an electric keyboard plugged into a computer and you've only got the computer, there's another method we can use. It's a little bit more convoluted, but there is a way. So I've got my piano selected. What I'm going to do is, in nearly every workstation I've ever used, it has a thing called piano roll. So find that on your workstation. In Logic it's in Window and then it's here. And then what we can do is we can just click each note to add it in. So there's the C, and then it went up to the G, the fifth, then it went down to the E. There we are. When I press play, oh, it's a bit wonky. Let's tidy that up a bit. In piano roll, you can move things around wherever you want. There we go. That looks straight to me. Let's have a listen to it. That's fine. Then to repeat that, we can just highlight the whole thing. I'm going to press Command and C or Control and C or right click and copy to copy it. Move my playhead to wherever I need it to be, which is about there. And then paste, copy and paste over and over again. There we go. There is my little Alberti bass line. Have a listen to it, check it sounds okay and it's in time. There it is, going round and round in a loop. One thing it's also worth mentioning here is if I just move these across, if you remember back to the very first video, we were describing major and minor chords. If we look at the shape here, with the 3 semitone gap and the 2 semitone gap, we get a major chord, just like in the first video. If I wanted to make that a minor chord, all I've got to do is take that middle note, that third, move it down a semitone, so that now the 2 semitone gap is here and a 3 semitone gap here, we get a minor chord. Lovely. Now then, what you may be asked to do is to produce a musical score, and again, in most workstations there's a simple way of doing that. At the moment I'm looking at the piano roll view. If I want to, with the same function, I can look at the score editor view, and it will show you what it looks like when it's written on a score. If for whatever reason you don't have that particular workstation, there are lots of others available. So one of the other workstations we could use is one I particularly like. It's called BandLab. It's a completely browser-based digital audio workstation, so you don't need to download anything. The whole thing works in a browser. One of the advantages is you could work on something at home. You could then log into the same BandLab at school or at college and then pick up where you left off with your ideas. So let's take a look at that one. The layout is very similar to other workstations we'll be looking at. So all we have to do is make sure our metronome is switched on. I'm going to use the same chords as before. Just play my chord. That's it. And there it is. And then we can, just like in the other one, we can add another instrument to that. We just go add track. You know, many of these workstations, they're all very, very similar. They may be laid out slightly differently, but they all do a very similar thing. This is a particularly nice one because it's nice and simple to use. It's not overly complicated. You can add as many tracks as you want, really, well, within reason. And then we can just add another track on top of that, strings. Lovely. And then just like we did before, go back to the beginning. Metronome is on. I can add the strings in as well. Now then, one of the other advantages here is if you don't have a digital piano plugged into your computer, you can, if you notice here, just press the letters on your keyboard, or you can just click each of these to play a note. So if I press K, I can play that C. I can actually play a little melody just by pressing the keys on my keyboard. Again, it's not an ideal situation, but if you don't have the equipment that you want, this is a really good solution in order to put down your ideas. Now let's look at another way that you might input your chords onto a computer, and that is to use a score editor. This particular one is called MuseScore. I particularly like it because it's free and it kind of does the job we want. Another one you may have heard of is one called Sibelius. Again, they're rather similar to each other. So to put those chords in that we just did earlier in a program like this, I need to tell it that I'm putting in notes. I need to tell it what type of note. In this instance, it's a quaver or an eighth note. And then I can just click each note in the right place wherever I want it. Most score editors will let you enter notes by playing them on the keyboard rather than clicking on the screen. I've made a tiny mistake there, but I quite like it. I'm going to leave that in, I think. There we are. Again, just like all the others, I can copy and paste that as much as I want. Again, if I want to put in the other chords, which are down here, we just click the notes that we want to put in. Oops, and then press the down arrow to make a little correction. I can move the note up and down wherever I want to. Then I had, what was it? I had a G major, G, B, and D. There we are. Click back again. There we are. We get the rough idea of what it's supposed to sound like. There's a mistake here as well. Again, that's easily rectified. I can just move things around. Okay then, so those are some of the input methods you'll use for your composition. It's important to remember that when you submit work, it has to be obviously an audio file, and it also has to be something that is effectively written or described. Let's look at that in a little more detail now. Each examining body, when you're composing for GCSE, needs to have a written score of some sort or a written account. Really worth speaking to your school or college and asking them which examining body they use. Then you can go online, you can find the specifications for that qualification. All the information you need will be on there. There's no problem in looking over the same specification that the teacher can see as well. It's all freely available on the internet, and it's really worth getting to grips with what the specification is, what is expected of you, what you need to get a high mark. In the case of scoring your composition, they're all a little bit different. So let's look at AQA. They're a very common one. They want either a staff notated score, which would look something like that. That's a staff notated score. That one happens to be for piano and voice. Or a lead sheet. A lead sheet's slightly different. It's just got chords and melody on it. It would look something similar to that. Or an oral guide. Pearson's is similar but different. Again, methods of notating composition scores include a staff notation, a graphic notation, or written accounts. If we look at the Cambridge iGCSE, theirs is a little stricter actually. It says here that notation may be handwritten or computer generated. Chances are it'll be computer generated. Back in my day, it had to be handwritten because computers just weren't capable of that sort of thing. All scores must be accurately edited. If notations other than staff notation, i.e. other than this type of notation, are used, they must be accurately designed to show the duration of the sounds represented by whatever symbols are used. E.g. guitar chords and symbols on their own don't really show the note duration. So what we've seen here is that one thing that's common to all of these syllabi, is that a staff notation, one that looks like this, is kind of your gold standard benchmark that you should be aiming for. Yes, technically you can get away with doing other forms of notation, but speaking as a music teacher, it's a lot easier to mark and it's a lot easier to understand the composer's intentions if they've got it written down on a score like this. There are many different ways that we could do that. So for example, here I'm using GarageBand. It's quite an old version of GarageBand, but it does the job. If I hit record and I'm going to record a bass line, same chords as we used before, it will score it out for you. And what I could later do is copy that across into Sibelius or into MuseScore, or I could physically write it out on a piece of paper. It gives you the score there. You can copy that and paste it, or you can physically just click on each note and add that into Sibelius or MuseScore, or like I said, put it on a piece of paper. You can do a similar thing in Logic Pro X as well. So here's the composition. It's those two chords, the Alberti bass, the Alberti piano thing. I've also put a simple melody of 4 notes on top of it. So all I need to do is highlight all of that, window, and I want to look at the score editor. Again, most workstations have something similar to this. When I open the score editor, I get something that looks like that. There it is. Now I could pretty much print that off verbatim. You get the idea. It will play all the way through, or I could copy that into another program such as MuseScore or such as Sibelius. But most audio workstations will allow you to see a score like that. And of course, at this point, you could edit it if you want to. I should be able to pick a note, move it around, put it somewhere else, whatever, just like you would in Sibelius. Now it sounds like. Obviously, we don't want that. You get the idea. You've now got an auto-generated score, which you know the examiner or the music teacher will be able to understand. It will make sense to them. They don't have to try and decipher some convoluted scoring system that you've got. Another way that you might want to enter your composition into a workstation and then have it written out as a score is to save it as a MIDI file. MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. It's been around since the 1980s. It's a very well-known, well-used protocol, and pretty much every program should be able to open it. So you open up your workstation, either Logic or BandLab or whatever, Pro Tools, whatever you're using. In this instance, here's my composition. Again, it's just using those same two chords as we had before. So I'm just going to highlight those. Again, most workstations have a very similar function. Highlight them, and then I need to export them as a MIDI file, Musical Instrument Digital Interface. Once I do that, I can call it whatever I want. I can put it on the desktop, GCSE1, save it. That will be there, ready to open. Then the next thing I do is find that file, open it with whichever program I like. I'm using MuseScore, but you could be using Sibelius. You could use pretty much any other music program you like. MIDI, M-I-D-I, is a very, very generic protocol that pretty much everything should open. And there it is. There's my composition. Was in Logic, now it's in digital score editing program. Obviously it needs a little bit of work done on it because that note's in the wrong place. It's not perfect. There's a clef change here which I don't like, but you can save yourself quite a lot of time by just exporting something as a MIDI file, then opening it again in whichever program you prefer to edit your scores in. So in a nutshell, that's how we can take our ideas, our little chord sequences or melodies that we've created, and add them into a digital audio workstation. We looked at different audio workstations you can use, some paid for, some free. We looked at different score editors that we could use in different ways of taking your ideas and not only recording them into a workstation, but also scoring them out so that the examiner has something that they can read. In the next lesson, we'll be looking at some more advanced compositional techniques.